Hello and welcome to another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. My name is Mike Bombard. I'm a principal cloud architect here on the pre-sales side of the house. And today we're going to be discussing how do I use Ansible automation with CloudBolt. We're going to take some time today to walk through setting up an integration with Ansible automation, being able to execute job templates, and really just show how to leverage Ansible automation. But first, let's take a second just to set up the background for this. So the business value for this particular video is CloudBolt wins with Ansible automation. CloudBolt has an open extensibility framework. It allows our customers to leverage the automation tools that they're already using in their environments to include Ansible automation. It increases your time to value for the solution with CloudBolt because you probably already have some automation things in place. If you're watching this video that are leveraging Ansible automation, you probably have people on staff that have skill sets that revolve around building job templates and automation with Ansible. So CloudBolt wants to not just force our customers into a single way to automate things, but provide a lot of different options around how to automate in the way that makes the most sense for your organization. Ansible automation wins with CloudBolt though. Leveraging CloudBolt as the front end for Ansible automation. When you're building cloud-based resources or on-premise-based resources with Ansible automation, CloudBolt gives that same self-service catalog look and feel that we do for the other cloud-based resources that we provision. You can present catalog items side by side that are leveraging different automation technologies, presenting a single pane of glass for your end users. We also can bridge the gap. We have a lot of customers that may be provisioning with Terraform, but then want to call Ansible automation to do some kind of customization against those Terraform-based resources. And CloudBolt can bridge the gap between those two. Pass outputs from your Terraform plan into inputs for your Ansible job templates and ensure that we're following configuration management and infrastructure deployment practices in a way that meets industry best practices. And finally, the agenda for what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to start by building an Ansible automation blueprint. It's going to be an ad hoc deployment, just a real simple, basic job template that we're going to execute. We're going to then talk through an Ansible automation class that we built for the purposes of this video. We will be putting the samples for this out on the CloudBolt Forge here. So the look in the links, the description for the video for the link to those resources that you can leverage and download and start to use to automate Ansible automation in your environment. We're going to submit job templates there, and then we're actually going to take the information from Ansible and write it back to CloudBolt so that we're able to reference what was done, maybe pass information on to additional elements in our workflow inside of CloudBolt, those types of things. We're then going to take and leverage custom forms to capture the extra variables required to drive our Ansible deployment. So we're going to take some time to go through custom forms, set it up, pass over extra variables, verify that we're seeing what we're presenting as extra variables and they're getting passed over to Ansible as expected. And then we'll talk about leveraging Ansible Tower in the machine lifecycle. So that's what we're going to cover as part of this video. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's take a couple of minutes to review the use case that we're going to be addressing as part of this video. To start off, I'm logged into my Ansible automation platform instance. I have a very, very simple job template that I've constructed in here. The job template's pretty straightforward, but really what this should represent is a basic ad hoc job template that is hosted by Ansible automation. There's a lot of flexibility in Ansible automation, and the way that you structure your job templates can dictate whether you're going to drive or capture certain inputs. I'm taking a very basic use case and I'm giving you the tools as part of this video to be able to extend that use case when needed to meet your specific requirements. So very basic job template. There's a lot of things I'm not doing. I'm actually going to go to edit here. One of the things that if you're working with Ansible automation, you probably already know this, but if this is newer to you, these prompt on launch selections at the job template, if you have not pre-selected prompt on launch, we are not able to drive in anything for those specific things as part of an API call. So inventory, for example, I don't have prompt on launch selected, which means that anytime this job template is run, it will always run against my demo inventory. You may not want that to happen. You may want to dynamically drive it. And if that's the case, you want to ensure that your prompt on launch is selected here. If not, it's going to take the inventory that was pre-selected for this specific job template. One of the things that you will note here, I am not setting any variables, any extra variables in my job template itself. I am prompting on launch for those because with CloudBolt, really, I think where we can help impact this a lot is to drive the required extra variables in at request time to impact the outcome of a specific Ansible automation job template. So I will be working through extra Vars a lot with this example. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail down the road. This is, so the backing playbook here, let's just look at that real quick. There's a couple of very basic tasks that this is doing. Really, this could be automating anything inside of my environment. But I wanted to showcase a couple of things. Number one, I want to capture two different extra Vars. They're very simple, but these could be things like machine name or instance type or whatever you're leveraging to drive your Ansible automation. So as we're building out this use case, we're going to want to be sure to pass in extra var 1 somewhere. We also want to pass in extra var 2 and values for those. This is really just, and this is just to showcase some of the things that I've built into the way that I'm handling Ansible automation. I'm really just going to kind of not necessarily log, but I'm going to output things leveraging the set stats and the set fact command inside of Ansible. We've had customers that leverage each of these to capture information about the automation run that just occurred. And what CloudBolt will do is when there are facts or stats with an Ansible job template run, we'll actually capture those. And in CloudBolt, we'll write that metadata back as parameters on the CloudBolt resource so that you can leverage set fact and set stats to give your end user good, meaningful data about the thing that we just provisioned. So maybe you're writing back an IP address here as a result of building a machine, or an IP address as a result of building a network, something along those lines. We will capture that information in CloudBolt and make it available to the end user. So we're going to show that as we get a little deeper into this. Again, this is really straightforward. It's just an ad hoc request. It's not provisioning anything, but it will create a representation of something if we were to have provisioned it. So let's go ahead and jump over to my CloudBolt instance. And from here, I'm going to create a new blueprint. We're going to call this Ansible Automation. And part of what we'll talk through as we get into this is there's a bit of code that I've put together for this. And this code, I'll make it available in the description in the YouTube video. But really, the code is something that you can leverage to start working with Ansible automation. You can tailor it to your specific use case. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this. Let's go ahead and set an appropriate image. So there's my Ansible automation image and resource name template, just so that I don't have to put in a different name for every resource that I'm building. I'm just going to do Ansible automation controller -00x. And this is going to handle the sequencing of the name that we're creating for the resource that we're building. But I could give this a more meaningful name, something that pulls in group, leverages template syntax. Why don't we do that? There we go. So now it's going to be Ansible automation controller -the group name, and then the sequence that we're going to generate as we go through this provisioning process. I do have an Ansible deployment resource type already available. So I'm going to pin this to an Ansible deployment, but I could create different resource types for each blueprint that I'm creating. In a real world environment, you're probably not telling the end user that this is an Ansible automation blueprint. Maybe it's a blueprint to deploy a network. This could just be a deploy network blueprint, and my resource type could be of the type of network for one blueprint. We could then actually reuse the same build item that we're going to be building in here, layer it with some different extra variables and drive it to a different job template. And maybe that's, instead of build network, that's build, deploy storage or something along those lines. And the resource type could be storage. So we want to make this repeatable whenever possible. And we'll uncover a lot more of that as we get deeper into this. So I'm going to set this as a favorite just so it rises to the top when I save. So we have my Ansible automation blueprint. I'm going to go ahead and set my groups. I'm going to allow any group to consume. Production, probably want to constrain your deploy environments for this specific use case. And then I'm going to start on my build tab. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to CloudBolt plugin. I'm going to create a new plugin action now. I'm going to do Ansible Automation run job template. I'm going to share this because, again, I may want to reuse this in multiple blueprints that are all calling Ansible to run a job template. So I'm going to fetch this from URL. We're not going to get into the specifics around the code a ton. I will cover off some of the things that I'm doing in there and give some pointers around how I might recommend using this code, but we're not going to build something from scratch like I've done in some of these other videos. This is really centered around communicating with Ansible and leveraging really custom forms inside of CloudBolt to intelligently capture requirements from the end user for those extra vars. So I am going to point at this file that exists in my file system. It's under var CloudBolt proserve, and I am. This is actually, you'll see this in the video link. It's under my how do I videos / use Ansible Automation, then Ansible Automation.py. Okay, so this should pull in my code, which is already pre-existing on this instance of CloudBolt. Okay, so now I have a new build item. This build item has some things going on in code here. I'm going to show that in the IDE versus in here. Let's just go over and take a look at the inputs real quick, though. So there's 4 inputs that we've determined with this specific example. Number 1 is Ansible Automation. We need to, and this is, in CloudBolt, this is a connection info that I've created, or I will create. I haven't created it for this specific instance yet. We'll go through that process here in just a minute. But I need to tell it how to connect to Ansible Automation. That's typically going to be username, password, as well as IP address, things along those lines. Then the template ID. So this is the ID for the job template. My template type, which is either going to be, and it's all inside of the documentation, but template type ends up being either, is it job templates, or there it is, workflow job templates or job templates. So it's one of those two based on the kind of job template that we're trying to execute from Ansible Automation. This specific script will dynamically switch contexts and call one over the other. Okay, so I'm going to drag template type up a little bit here. Not that this really matters because we're not even going to be submitting this natively inside of CloudBolt. But yeah, so there are my options here. Let's go ahead and take a look at this, what we're doing in this script real quick. Okay, so this is the same thing that we were just looking at in CloudBolt. I like the highlighting a little better in my IDE. So documentation at the top kind of walks you through, and I do need to change this because 3 does not come after 1. So here's kind of the 2 things it's going to do: allow the selection of Ansible Automation connection info and job template in the blueprint. And then it's going to capture any outputs written in via set stacks or stats or facts and write them back to the CloudBolt resources parameters. So setup, we need to create a connection info first. If you are leveraging basic auth, which means that you can't create a token in Ansible Tower, I think it's, if I remember correctly, I think the reason I did this, because this was many months ago, I don't know that you can get a token for an Active Directory type account. So you have to do basic auth. So if you can't get a token, you want to be sure to set the script down here, this auth type, to basic. If not, and you are leveraging a token, you need to change this to OAuth 2 versus basic. So you may have to make one change in the script itself based on your authentication requirements. It is set up to configure the 2 that I was able to find that Ansible Automation leverages. The template should have the following options enabled. This is just a guideline, and this really, limit, if we want to pass in a limit, we can. I am not currently worried about a limit because I'm doing something a little more ad hoc. It's not going to impact my inventory. Extra variables, you do want that prompt on launch. The big thing here is remember that prompt on launch needs to be enabled for the fields that we want to be able to drive via automation. So we'll be talking through that. And yeah, default values for these, Ansible Automation, template ID, and template type. So what I mean by this is I would recommend in here, if we're not using, and we'll cover this in both ways, but if we were to prompt the user to use this without custom forms overlaying to capture those extra vars, what we probably want to do is go through, I don't have an Ansible Automation instance yet. Let's set that up real quick. So let's change gears a little bit. We're going to go over to set up my connection info. And this is just how we're going to authenticate to it. I'm going to capture my URL real quick so I don't have to type it in. But I'm going to create a new connection info. I'm going to call it Ansible. Actually, this doesn't have to be Pythonic. It could be, but I like to make these things a little more user-friendly. So all caps and spaces between the words. Here's my URL for the IP protocol, HTTPS. If you have a custom port that isn't 443, you can enter it here. You don't have to. And then I have a very basic user. And that should be all I need. So bare minimum, we need a name and IP address. You do need to put in a protocol, username and password. If you are doing the OAuth 2 option, you don't need a username. You just need to capture that token from Ansible and paste it in the password field. The last thing that we do want to do is we need to tag this with Ansible_automation. So create a new label for Ansible_automation. If this label doesn't exist, you won't be able to see this as part of a dropdown on that build item. So we're going to create this real quick. Now I've created my kind of secrets management, my connection info so that we can leverage this to connect to the endpoint. We can come back over here and now we should see a dropdown for default values on this item. Notice Ansible Automation is now available for the default value. I am going to run a job template. Workflow job templates function very similar. It's just there's a little more loops that we had to do in code to capture the stats and facts for each of those subjobs in the workflow job template. But the Ansible template ID, we probably want to set this. You could make this dynamic where maybe you allow the user to say, I want to run from a selection of different Ansible templates. You could do that, but I'm just going to make this very static because I only want to leverage a set facts sample job template for this blueprint. And you'll notice in the URL here, the ID for this job template is 10. So I'm going to want to capture that and put this into my CloudBolt instance. Now what we have is a very basic blueprint. You'll notice if you, let's see how this works. I'm actually not entirely sure that this would work the way that I'm hoping. Maybe it will. We'll see. Let's give it a shot. So let's go over and do tenant 2. We're going to go to my IT group. Notice these are all set up. So the other thing I probably want to do here is I'm going to go back to my build tab. I need to go to my plugin. So one of the options that we have on these variables that I want to set for the top 3, not extra vars because I want to capture those, but I want to say hide from a user when a default value is set. And what that does is because I have default set for these, I don't want the user to be able to change those values because they're going to be able to change the behavior of what we're doing here. And the way that we're handling this, where in this specific example, where we're allowing us to take in maybe a different Ansible Automation server or a different template ID or a different template type, this script is now variable driven and can be dynamically used in a multitude of different contexts. So it's now set up. Let's go back over to my blueprint. I'm going to order again, make sure it looks the way that I want to see it. There we go. Now we're just prompted with an extra vars input. Now, like I said, I've done some things to make this work better with a custom form inside of code. Let's just show what that is real quick. My extra vars, because I am capturing a dictionary here, it's actually getting passed in as a string. I think I can build that dictionary out But if you remember from our set stats and set facts, we are expecting extra var1 and extra var2 to both be passed in. So we're gonna pass those in and see if we can get this to work. All right, so the way that I've built this, let's think about this. So the way that the custom form submits things is as a list, and we'll unpack that a little bit when we get there. And then in the list, there should be a single dictionary entry. So I'm going to pass in, there's my extra var1, and then I'm going to just tailor this a little bit. Let's do extra var2. Let's go ahead and submit. So this should read the array or the list and take the first item from the list and pass it over to Ansible Automation. So let's just validate that our build item's working. Looks like it's working. It's already sent the job. It's now a pending job. We can go over to Ansible Automation and look to see that that set fact sample's already done running at this point. So let's see what we have. Let's go into our job. Here's the resource that we acted again. So I'm going to jump over to the resource object. And what you'll notice is all of those facts and stats that we specified. Some of them are dictionary items, some are lists, some are just normal strings. Notice the variables that we drove in for testing 2 and testing 1, which would have been our extra var1, extra var2. Those are both captured. Again, the big value there is as part of a piece of automation, we can standardize what outputs we're going to pass back to our end users. They can then consume those as further pieces of automation down the road. So if we had another build item that calls another Ansible job template, I could pass those items into the job template. Maybe that's not the best example because you could also use workflows to do something similar, but maybe it's you do something in Ansible, you want to pass those items to a virtual machine that was built in CloudBolt, or you want to pass those stats or facts over to a Terraform config that you're trying to leverage. Really, the idea is being able to unify those different pieces of automation and driving outputs that we need to be able to capture for automation or show back to the user. And it's a really easy way to do it by just doing that set stats or set fact command inside of your job templates or your playbooks. All right, so the Ansible automation, we're back over to our code sample. Just to start off, we have a very basic run command that's included with this content. The run command, you'll see that this is where we're kind of declaring those 4 variables. Again, with Django template language syntax, we are declaring that these should be variables for this CloudBolt plugin. CloudBolt parses this script and pulls in those and creates the corresponding parameters to drive these variables. So we're capturing these variables. We're then going in to check to make sure that we have the right template type added in. And then we're going to start up an Ansible Automation class, and we'll look at that in greater detail here in just a minute. Once that class has been instantiated, notice we're passing in the connection info ID, and that's how we know which connection info we're going to authenticate to. We're going to go out and get the launch URL for the Ansible template ID that was passed in. We are then going to run the template, and then we're going to take any of that. We're going to take that response and use it to write artifacts back to the resource. So pretty basic as far as a run function's concerned. Really where we're doing all of the work here is inside of this Ansible automation class. 2 other things that may be worth calling out here are these generate options plugins. So for Ansible automation, this is how we do that. We're just going through looking for connection info instances that match the label of Ansible automation. So remember when we added that Ansible automation label earlier, this is why we did it, is so that we can filter the connection infos for a specific use case. It then returns back a list where the user can select that Ansible automation connection info, and we'll actually capture the ID to ensure that we're using the correct connection info. Generate options for template type, pretty straightforward, just 2 strings that we're passing back. And that's kind of where we got the options to set those. One of the other things that I've done in the past is we've also leveraged this to dynamically generate options for Ansible template ID. So here's a sample. If you wanted to do something like that, you can take and leverage this as well. This is something I've used in an older version, so we're not really using get Ansible extra vars anymore. This specific method, I'm going to leave it here just because I may need to leverage that at some point in the future. But really, here is the kind of star of the show, is this Ansible Automation class. So a little bit more documentation around this, how to use it. Like you saw in our run method, we instantiated this class by passing in, actually, I did not update my documentation yet. Let's just say Ansible ID, and then basic or OAuth. So we can pass in these two parameters to the class, and it'll go through this init function where we take the connection info ID, the auth type. It sets all of this data for it. So things like the base URL and the root URL. The root URL is just the HTTPS and then the URL for the instance. The base URL takes in API v2. And I set these two separately because when we're making calls to Ansible Tower and we get back a request that has a next link in it, that next link needs to go, it starts with API v2. So I'm just setting these both once and I can reference them in the appropriate places in my code. I'm not currently verifying certificates. You can change this if you need to verify. And you can set up your auth type, and this get headers function is really where we're setting up the header. So remember our OAuth 2 or our basic type, it makes a selection and just sets up your header slightly differently based off of the authentication method that we're selecting here. There's a couple of helper methods here. So I like to do this in my code where I have one request method. You could still call this directly. I usually don't, but that request method then handles all of the logic for how we want to handle those calls, handles passing in the appropriate parameters and everything into our request. But we can then also call that and specify just, I'm going to do like AA. If I'm calling my Ansible automation instance AA, I can do AA.get, AA.post, AA.patch, and it handles a lot of that logic for us. So just making things a little easier, more repeatable across the class. We then get down to get all templates. So this is one of the methods that's included on here. Get all templates will return the templates. We're not going to spend a ton of time here. Get launch URL. This is where we're passing in the template ID and the template type, and that will return the launch URL that we're using to get to run the template. That is then passed into our run template command. So here's where we're going to spend most of our time here. Run template. I am not leveraging inventory, credential, or limit in my example. Again, it's very basic. It's set up. It's straightforward. I did add these additional capabilities here so that if you wanted to leverage inventory, credential, and limit, you can, but you would have to update where we're calling that to pass those pieces into this. So it's there. It's under the covers. It's not being used in my existing example, but I wanted to make this a little more flexible for, I think, what customers will leverage this for moving forward. But in my run template method, I'm doing all of those things, and then I'm just going through and I'm launching with the self.post. I'm launching my call with my parameters, my URL. And then part of what this will do is also wait for that job to complete. We don't want to exit for that. So wait for complete is actually, and I think I changed it back. So wait for complete goes through and pulls that job every, in my instance, 10 seconds. If you wanted to change that inventory period to be less or more, you can in your sample if you download this. So once that job is complete, it then returns that information back. And then here's just some of the methods that we're leveraging to get the job events and the artifacts and writing them back to the CloudBolt resource. So that's all that's included in the class. With this class, I'm calling this inside of a single blueprint. And the thought process is, because I'm using a shared CloudBolt plugin, what I could do is I could leverage this same plugin for both my build and my teardown action. Maybe you're targeting a different job template for teardown, or maybe you're just passing in a different extra var for teardown. Because I can leverage this same plugin in both of those contexts, I can write all of this into my build action. I don't like to repeat code. So if it does end up being that that we want to reuse some of these pieces of automation in different places, I will probably take this and put it somewhere else. There's two places that I typically go to here in CloudBolt, and let's just show this. So if you have a class you wanted to share with multiple build items, you could. This is mapped to the var opt CloudBolt ProServe directory in my environment. I could have a folder that has Ansible, and then maybe under that Ansible, I could have Ansible Automation as a Python module that includes my class. Then in my blueprints, I could do from Ansible.AnsibleAutomation, import Ansible Automation. It's a lot of Ansible and automation, right? But from Ansible.AnsibleAutomation, import Ansible Automation, my class, so that we can leverage that class from multiple different blueprint items. So directly under the ProServe directory would be one option. Another option is I like to leverage a ZUI for these kinds of things where actually I don't think Ansible Automation has it, but my Git management ZUI here does, where I can do from ZUI.getmanagement.utilities. I can import my Git management class here. I can do import GitHub wrapper, and then I can reference that GitHub wrapper class and call it from any blueprint or any orchestration action or really any CloudBolt plugin inside of the CloudBolt system. So it makes that shareable. I just wanted to talk through that a little bit. But again, since we're using this in a single blueprint, this is set up. It's ready to go. And again, we'll include this link in the video description so you can leverage this and pull it down for your own instance and your own use. Now we're going to go ahead and shift into using custom forms to drive the extra variables that we need to capture from CloudBolt. So let's get into the custom forms here. So we go over to our custom forms tab to start. I have not created a default form yet, so I'm going to first generate a default form. One of the things that you'll note when we go through this, when we're leveraging a custom form, even though on our build item we set some of those as defaults, we have to reset those values in the form itself. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll down. Actually, you know what? We don't have to, because when I leverage the build tab, what I didn't do in my first example I built before this video, I did not set these in the plugin to be hidden if a default value is set. So I'm able to set this and not have to worry about it in the form. So because I have that checkbox selected for hide from the user when a default value is set, I have my default values set. It's not even prompting me for those values in the custom form. So we don't have to worry about that. That's good to know. So now I'm learning something. Okay, so extra vars. What this is doing in CloudBolt with extra vars, what we're trying to do here is create a dictionary entry that captures all of the extra vars that we're looking for that we need to pass over to Ansible. So to do that, there's in the form builder here, we have this single input option, which is what it starts with. I'm actually going to go ahead and change it from single input. I'm going to change it over to what we call a panel or a dynamic panel. What's interesting about a dynamic panel, and I'll show you here in just a second, why don't we just add a question? And I did not capture the name of that. But let's copy my extra var 1 and extra var 2 again. Extra var 1, I'm going to add another question. Extra var 2. I do want to check over here for each of these fields. You want to make sure that the name and the title for the field match. Really what we're passing back is the name, not the title. So I can call this whatever I want and label it as my first input. But what we're passing back as an extra var is the name for this field. So we could do things a little different. We just, like I said, want to make sure that that name field is what we're expecting to get passed from an extra var. Maybe we make this something a little different where probably not a real example of what we're trying to do, but you get the idea. You can present a user-friendly label for the thing that we're trying to capture and pass it back to the back end as the appropriate extra var that we're trying to pass through. So let's just take a look at this real quick. So as part of the custom form setup, we have another how do I video for custom forms. I would recommend checking that out. That goes a little bit deeper than what we're going to do here. But when we're talking about custom forms, this preview tab is really helpful in what we're going to do. It shows what it's going to look like as we go through the submission process. And notice, so I'm already seeing a mistake. So extra vars is telling me I need to add, there's no entries yet. I need to add new. And that's because when we use a dynamic survey, what it does is it has a list of questions and it can be 0 or more. So the way that it's set up out of the box, we kind of have to change it a little bit. So initial panel count, we want it to be 1. Minimum panel count, we also want this to be 1 so that this is always showing when we start. And maximum panel count, we also want that to be 1. I don't want them to be able to submit more than 1 request. If you remember back to earlier in the video when we did the extra vars manually, we put them inside of a set of square brackets that tell that it was a list, and you'll see why in just a second. So, okay, so my extra vars, and maybe I don't want to call this field extra vars, so I'm going to change this to questions. Doesn't really matter what we call it, but this is again a label. What you don't want to change here is this name. This name is how we're handling the mapping to our extra vars field inside of the CloudBolt plugin. So on the question that represents extra vars, do not change the name, and on these, we want this to be the name of each of the extra vars that we're trying to submit. So now that I've changed that, I'm going to save this form real quick. Go back over to my preview. Let's give it another shot, see how this works. There we go. So now we see the survey. And okay, if we go to order this now, we can see the preview shows what this is going to submit, what kind of format it's in. So like I'd mentioned, this is going to create that dictionary entry that we submitted earlier. Actually, there we go. So the panel, here's what we're submitting. So these were our questions that were asked, but here's what we're actually going to submit on the back end. This is what we're going to see, and this is what's going to get passed over to our extra vars. Is the extra var 1, Maryland, extra var 2, blue. So that when we submit, it should capture those values like this. So this gives you a little bit of visibility into what the user submitted in the survey. Let's go back over to the designer. We could also do other things in each of these questions here, like instead of a single input, maybe we're going to do a drop down, or we could also query some REST API to give a list of different available options as part of this. So there's a lot of flexibility built into the way that we're handling these custom forms. The big thing is our extra vars need to match what Ansible is requiring inside of the job template or the playbook itself. So I'm going to add one more question. So we have those 2 questions, and let's just do extra var 3, even something that isn't currently required. You can change my name, and then so adding an additional question just to show that we're capturing all of the extra vars, passing all of them over, and they're all eligible for use as part of what we're passing over. So I'm going to save my form. Before you exit the tab, you need to save the form, or it will discard those changes. It will warn you if you attempt to leave before saving the form as well, which is helpful. Let's go ahead and submit my request. So now we have my group, IT. I'm going to go, what state are you from? Blue and blue. Let's go ahead and order. This should go through and submit my request. It's now running my job template. Let's jump over to Ansible Automation platform. I'm going to go to my latest job. So there we go. We have our job is now kicked off, and we can see the progress from the job. But if we go to the details tab, here we can see all of the extra vars that we're getting passed in. Even though we're not using one of them, the extra var 3, we can pass in anything that we want, any information from our environment. We can pass it in from our group. just makes it really handy to capture those things. And we can see the artifacts that were set here. Again, if we come back over to our resource should also show those parameters that were passed in. So capturing that data on the object inside of CloudBolt. So we've now built a custom form. That custom form is building out it's that panel view. Let's just go back and review this real quick. So we have a single panel that represents our entire extra vars variable. That panel can have as many inputs as you need, and we'll pass these through as a dictionary entry of extra vars that we then pass over to the REST API so that we are passing the appropriate extra var stack over to Ansible. So this custom form can serve as an overlayment. I mentioned it earlier, but let's just talk about it one more time. If I have multiple blueprints, maybe one for deploy network, one for deploy storage, I can leverage this same shared Ansible automation run job template and set different defaults in each blueprint. So maybe, deploy network is ID 10, deploy storage is ID 11. Just by setting that difference in the two templates, it's going to drive different automation. And then what I can do is I can put a custom form on each blueprint, one that corresponds to networking inputs, one that corresponds to storage inputs, and capture the needed information to package up my extra variables and pass them all over to Ansible. Ansible Automation then runs the job template. We pull that job template until it completes, and then upon completion, we'll take any facts or stats that were set as part of the playbook specification, and it will write those back to the object inside of CloudBolt. You now have an object in CloudBolt that can be managed and from a resource lifecycle perspective. I also mentioned earlier, I could also include my shared build action under the teardown tab and use that to call a different job template and pass in the appropriate extra vars from my resource to tear the resource down. So allowing me to use one shared CloudBolt plugin in many different contexts to suit different use cases inside of CloudBolt. So I think that's it for custom forms. The last thing that I wanted to discuss was leveraging Ansible Tower in the machine lifecycle. So this is for an ad hoc Ansible Tower call. The next question would be, though, how do we invoke Ansible Tower to take a machine that CloudBolt has provisioned, place that machine into an appropriate inventory, maybe run some job templates against that resource, all of those kinds of things. And we can do that. It's not currently, well, the sample that I have set up today is not set up to do that currently, but this would be a piece of it, right? So typically you're building a server. The first step is add that server to an inventory and inventory groups. So that class that we've built out to run the job template can be extended to add some functionality to basically add a server to an inventory, make sure that it's in the inventory. And then as the next step, we can use this reusable run job template plugin, which would go out and execute a job template against that inventory. Maybe we're going to also send a limit across that command so that we can limit what we're executing against in that inventory. Maybe it's an inventory group or just the server host name itself that we want to execute against. So leveraging this in the context of a machine inventory is just another add that additional REST call into the class, create another build item that adds it to the inventory, and then you can add to inventory and then run the job template against the inventory as needed. We can also take this run job template and run it in the context of a day two action. So maybe a management action. We could add that in here and update the plugin a little bit to capture the server that we're running in the context of. And then we can capture information from that server and pass that data over to Ansible Tower. So CloudBolt offers the extensibility components required to basically be able to do what you need to do with Ansible Tower at the appropriate lifecycle phases inside of CloudBolt. So hopefully this has been helpful today, but this ends the video where we're covering how do I use Ansible automation in CloudBolt blueprints. This concludes another video in the How Do I Do Something in CloudBolt video series. If you've made it this far, congratulations. Some of these can get to be a little bit lengthy. If you have any questions at all regarding anything that we've covered today, or really just anything about CloudBolt in general, please reach out to your account team. We're happy to cover any questions you may have, and we're always looking for additional ideas to cover as part of this series. So please reach out to your account team. Let us know how we can help you, and happy automating with CloudBolt.